Hello, welcome back to History 1302-83402 at Richland College. I am Kevin Porch, your professor, and I am not in a classroom, but I do upload at least 2 videos a week in support of your journey towards earning an A in this class. My videos are always family friendly and helpful. Consider hitting the YouTube like and subscribe buttons. Let's get to it. Let's chat briefly about your reading assignment for week 1, Unit 5, Lesson 17, The American West. You really need to watch the Lesson 17 video in addition to reading the text. The video makes some excellent points about the American West, particularly the idea of the myth of the American West. These videos draw upon some of America's most prominent historians. In the case of Lesson 17, you will meet Richard White, who is a professor of history at Stanford University, one of my favorites, and a real expert on the American West and American Indian culture. So what's most important in Lesson 17? 2 things, I think. The final and utter devastation of the American Indian culture on the plains and the forced movement of Latino people from upper and middle class status to that of a laboring class. Both events driven by the Anglos migrating westward. These stories represent portions of our nation's history we must understand to fully grasp the realities of issues that our nation faces today. Following the Civil War, big economic changes quickly evolved in the American West. Mining for gold, silver, and other valuable minerals, expansion of ranching and cattle drives, the sphere in which the historical cowboy operated, the expansion of the railroad industry, and the arrival of European immigrants seeking cheap farmland under the U.S. Homestead Act. These changes put the U.S. on a trajectory of economic expansion unparalleled in modern times. These changes also required land and labor. As a result, 2 cultural tragedies occurred. The ancient culture of the Plains Indians, focused on horses and the buffalo, was destroyed, and the men and women who had previously been Spanish and Mexican citizens and landowners were reduced to a subordinate laboring class by the newly dominant Anglo culture. As whites demanded more of the Indian homeland, especially sacred places such as the Black Hills located in modern South Dakota, this forced the powerful Sioux Indians to make war. In 1876, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, located in modern Montana, that's where General George Armstrong Custer and 260 U.S. Army soldiers were killed by Crazy Horse and the Sioux Indians he led. The victory was short-lived. In fact, by 1890, just 14 years later, the final perceived Indian threat in the United States and Indian activity known as the Ghost Dance had been snuffed out at the Wounded Knee Massacre, where over 200 Sioux men, women, and children were shot by U.S. troops. That site is located in modern South Dakota. Overwhelmed by superior military forces and forced to assimilate as farmers and Christians, the ancient culture of the Plains Indians disappeared. As for Latino men and women who became American citizens following the U.S. seizure of the American Southwest from Mexico, land grants that had been legally recognized for centuries were rejected by white courts as not valid. Families were dispossessed of land, homes, and stripped of their dignity. White supremacist assumptions often applied to African Americans, characteristics of docility, laziness, and destined to serve as a laboring class, also facilitated the legal dispossession of an entire Latino culture that only today is beginning to fully reclaim itself. Think about this. Most Americans would name the Alamo and the Little Bighorn as 2 of the most famous military battles in American history. Why? Because all the good guys were killed by the bad guys. In those 2 military encounters, it was the American soldiers and cowboys who were the good guys. The Indians and the Mexicans were the bad guys. By extension, then, these 2 historical events paint a picture of American expansion as defensive in nature. In other words, westward expansion and the dispossession of other peoples was a reasonable response to being attacked. The mythology of the West. Certainly we Americans were not conquerors, were we? Or were we? That said, one thing I want to recommend, if you've been watching this video in the background, that's on Netflix, and it's a thing called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. So since we're talking about the American West, it is by the Coen brothers, and it's a great movie. 4 vignettes about the American West. Totally interesting. I'll leave it at that. Okay, happy reading. Go make history. I'm out of here. Deuces.